Greetings, back again. Well, today I thought I would do something a little different. I have this black Canson paper that I have, but it's not really a favorite paper to use for this kind of thing. The tooth is a little too high. It's really meant for pencils, so it's kind of rough. And I wanted to use my repeatograph pens, but instead of using the repeatograph, I ended up using the Rotring Isograph because here I'm trying to get the pen to work, and it just didn't really want to feed onto this paper with the white ink. My white ink is a little old too, so it's kind of dry, and it tends to clog, and the repeatographs tend to be more sensitive to flow than the isographs, than the Rotrings do. So, or the Koh-I-Noor pens tend to be a little more sensitive than the Rotrings. The Rotrings, I always get better flow. So, let's get on with it. Now, when I was a boy, we lived out in Malibu, and it's the land of long driveways. It seems like if you had a driveway that was less than an eighth of a mile long, you were too close to the road. But not every house was like that, and our driveway was not terribly long. If I stood at the front of the house and threw a rock as hard as I could, it still might not make it to the front gate. But it wasn't like it was super duper far away. But it seems like that's the big thing now. Everyone wants a long driveway. We had a front gate. It was a big black wrought iron affair. It was put in by the people who owned the house before us, and the Dryers. They were German, and they liked these sort of European touches on their early American farmhouse style home. And we had this big black wrought iron gate with these kind of fleur-de-lis points on the top of it. My dad always thought it was a little ridiculous, but I always thought it was cool. I thought it kind of looked like a cemetery gate, you know. It was kind of neat, and it was supported by two big red brick columns that had these large, hand-built Spanish lamps on top. They were great big lamps with amber plates of glass in them. They were very, very pretty with twisted wrought iron on them, very ornate. Unfortunately, one of them died a terrible death when in a windstorm a power cable blew down onto it, and when the electric company came to put the cable back up, they just yanked the cable, and it really deformed the lamp. The lamp got all bent up and out of shape. Eventually, my father did have it restored at great cost, but it was like that for many years, just all twisted up in front of our house. Malibu was one of those places, or it used to be one of those places, when if it was nighttime, there was no moon, and it was just slightly overcast so the stars couldn't shine through. It was dark. It was really, really dark. And we used to love to go outside at night and play with the flashlights out in the yard. I remember one time when they were doing the lunar landings. I remember we went outside when the moon was full, and we sat out there with our flashlight and shined it up at the moon, and we wondered if the astronauts could see us from Earth. My dad had this flashlight that was actually a automobile headlight, and it was so bright we could shine it up to the trees, and I would think that certainly the astronauts could see me with that one if they couldn't see me with my little metal flashlight with the little red end cap that held the little lens on and the on-off switch. We used to go out with our flashlights when at the beach house. We would go out and we would go and get grunion. We would go grunion hunting, and we'd use the flashlights for getting squid. The squid would come in close to the shore to get the grunion, and the water always felt so warm at night for some reason. One of the things I liked to do at night, on a clear night, was watch the car headlights coming in from town. I would watch them as they would pass by the mountains and going up the road, and I could track the same car for miles, it seemed. I could wait 10-15 minutes for them to get closer and closer until I could finally hear the sound of the wind blowing past the cars. It seems like all the cars would whistle back then, too. so I could hear the cars whistle by on the highway just about a half a mile away from the house. And on one of those really, really black nights, I remember I was watching the headlights from our house. The headlights of the cars would shine up in our neighborhood onto the trees, and the trees would be illuminated for a short time, and then they would go out, and then another set of trees down the way would light up. And one night I was waiting during one of these dark nights. A car came up, and it was Eddie Karam. My dad had been talking to him earlier in the day, and Eddie went into town to go pick up a car and then do a record session, a recording date over at Group 4 Recording. And on his way home, my dad wanted Eddie to swing by with his new car so he could see it. Well, it was one of these pitch black nights, and when Eddie came into our driveway, even though we were standing right in front of it, you couldn't see the car. You couldn't tell what color it was or any of the details. But we did go for a ride in the car. Eddie took us for a drive. We went out to the highway and drove up near Zuma Beach and all around, and it was fabulous. A little later on, my dad rented one of these. He decided my mom needed a new car, and that's why he wanted to see Eddie's car, to see if he would want to get a Cadillac himself. So he actually rented a Cadillac, and we had the Cadillac for a couple of weeks. And my mom drove it, my dad drove it, and finally my dad decided he didn't want anything to do with a Cadillac. He said he finally understands why people drive the way they do when they own a Cadillac. And it's because you have to drive that way. The car is so big, there's nothing you can really do but commit to where you're going when you have to go. And we had that Cadillac. I thought it was great, riding around in the back seat, big leather seat, and it rode like a dream, and it had those 3 little lights way up on the end of the fender so you could see the front of the car at night, the running lights, or I used to call them robot lights, and I loved it when my mom would turn on the high beams because I could see the little blue light. Well, that's about it. This Cadillac came out looking kind of like a Lincoln Ack, but I like to draw from memory for the most part, and sometimes you get little details not quite right, but close enough. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story, and we'll see you next time.